way to do it. It's a special pleasure to welcome Katharina von Schnurbein. Katharina, I think you're sitting in Brussels, is that correct? Right. But not too long ago, in fact, a year ago in March, you were with us in Bloomington for a major conference we held entitled Contending with Anti-Semitism in a Rapidly Changing Political Climate. If it was rapidly changing at that time, I don't even know what words I should use to describe the time we're in, except it's a very, very difficult time, as we all know, and in many different respects, a resurgence of anti-Semitism, which has been going on in a troubling way since the beginning of the millennium, has by no means gone asleep. It's right now perhaps overshadowed by news about the pandemic, in this country by a great deal of racial strife as well, and by an economic downturn. And as these conditions worsen, the fear is that anti-Semitism, which has already been rising, may worsen as well. And Katharina von Schnurbein will update us, in fact, on some of the ways in which that has been happening in Europe, as well as updating us on responses to it by herself and her colleagues and other people she works with in countries throughout the European Union. Katharina von Schnurbein was the first person appointed as the EU's coordinator on combating anti-Semitism, and also importantly, helping to foster Jewish life in Europe. As we all know, Jewish life in Europe was devastated during the years of the Holocaust. In a number of countries in more recent years, it's been heartening to see a revival. At the same time, in these countries are also threats to Jewish life. And Katharina von Schnurbein works with people who take both of those matters very seriously, and she will update us in detail about them. I should say her webinar today is the second in our series. Dave Rich spoke 2 weeks ago extremely well on the situation in the UK. We will have 2 more webinars in July and 2 in August. You're now all on our mailing list, so you'll get postings about these. But just very briefly, on July 13th, Rafał Pankowski will be speaking to us from Warsaw about the situation in Poland. And a couple of weeks later, on July 27th, Dina Porat will be speaking from Tel Aviv University on defining and monitoring anti-Semitism. Now it's my pleasure to turn over to Katharina von Schnurbein, who will make a presentation about the situation in the countries that she takes a hard look at day by day by day, fill us in on developments there, both with respect to anti-Jewish hostilities and, importantly, the responses to those. Katharina, thank you so much for being with us. It's now my pleasure to turn over to you.
Dear Professor Rosenfeld, thank you so much for having me again. I very fondly remember the 3 days I had at ISCA in March last year. It was like a refreshment from the usual work, being able to think, to bounce ideas with others, and to engage in real dialogue. So I very much appreciate this opportunity today to hear also from the scientific community and how things are going and how you see the situation also, because I personally very much believe in this exchange between research and policy making, and I think really it's key. In the US, you're probably much more used to it than we are in Europe, because there is a different type of turnover also between administration and research. But for us, with regards to anti-Semitism, it's really very important. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. It's a pleasure really to be with you. Thank you also, Günther, for hosting the debate. I'll give you indeed an overview about how the situation is at the moment, and then importantly what we have been doing over the last years, months now, also with a focus on COVID, but going beyond that and before that as well. The creation of this post actually came after Charlie Hebdo, the attack in Paris in December 2015, and the attack on Hyper Cacher. But as we know, it wasn't the first one on Jewish premises. Rather, we had seen already 2012 Toulouse and the Brussels Museum, and then after followed the Copenhagen synagogue. And so we had seen a series of Islamist attacks on the Jewish community, while most recently we have now also had, like you have had in the US, attacks coming from right-wing extremists on the synagogue of Halle. I think what was important at that time was really the recognition not only that the Jewish community is seriously under threat, but also that the threats come from all sides, and it is not just directed towards religious sites, but really also sites that are perceived as Jewish, like a shop, like a school, and a museum. The new commission came into place in December 2019 with President von der Leyen at its head. So she comes from Germany, and really, I have to say, right at the beginning, 10 days into her mandate, gave a very important speech on her vision on the fight against anti-Semitism. She has placed the responsibility with Vice President Skinas, who's responsible for the promotion of the European way of life. And in his portfolio as a politician is the responsibility for security, for education, and also health. So all these different aspects together, education covers, for example, also sports and youth, make it that we have a good set of instruments at our hands in order to reach and cover the different areas that we need to reach out to. And of course, with regards to the health portfolio now, during the COVID crisis, this was a major issue. He is like von der Leyen from the Conservative Party from Greece, and I believe there is a clear willingness and vision also from the political level to address this in an upgraded way, let's say, and that also always is then expressed in putting more people on this file, and so they've enlarged the team, and I think there will be good possibility to move things forward beyond the European level to the national level. The overarching principle when it comes to our idea, our ultimate goal must be normalcy for Jewish life in Europe, and the fact that Jews need to see a future for themselves in Europe. We've done a survey among 16,300 Jewish Europeans in 2018, and it showed that 4 out of 10 Jewish Europeans say that they had thought in the previous year about leaving Europe. Now they don't leave. We know that only a very small percentage in the end leaves, although since 2014, in fact, the overall Jewish number of Jewish people in Europe is indeed declining. But simply the fact that they think about it is already very bad and alarming. And this is sort of the starting point to say whenever Jews felt they needed to leave Europe, it was bad for Europe, and it is the known connection, of course, between rising anti-Semitism on the one side and it being a threat to democracy in more general terms. And I think this is the understanding also very clearly from this commission that has come into office in December 2019, that then this nexus is important to understand. In my personal experience also, whenever politicians actually understand this connection, this is when they start acting. Now we've seen a rise of anti-Semitism during the COVID crisis, and I'm sure that Dave Rich spoke to you about this recent development, because the CST has done a lot of very good work on debunking myths and on monitoring conspiracy myths against the Jewish community related to COVID. The World Jewish Congress did a survey whereby already in March there was a 30% increase of anti-Semitic rhetorics in comparison to November 2019, and we have seen it rise ever since. We think that it's very important to address this, given the short way from conspiracy myths and the networks that surround it to radicalization, and in the end, possibly to anti-Semitic hate crime. We saw this in Halle, we've seen it in Pittsburgh, we saw it in Christchurch as well. So there is definitely this link, and conspiracy myths in a way are difficult to tackle because they are not necessarily, according to European legislation, hate speech. They don't necessarily directly incite to hatred and violence, but the indirect effect can be lethal, and therefore it's very important to understand this aspect. As much of it at the moment is coming from the far right and the right-wing extremist circles and experts. We've been a lot in touch with different experts. They tell us that especially now during COVID, where people were so much more online, first these circles really increased. They became much more active. They have created a situation where they network much better, and secondly, they have managed to reach into mainstream, in particular those let's say middle class people who oppose for one reason or the other the measures of the government with regards to COVID. So you might have seen some of those t-shirts of the so-called Corona rebels that have demonstrated in Germany against forced vaccination that they claim comes from Bill Gates, supported by Soros or supported by Rothschild, to forced vaccinate all the Europeans, and they carry T-shirts that are produced by far-right extremists with a Star of David, a yellow Star of David on it, saying "not vaccinated." Yeah, so implying they are the new victims, and there is a very clear connection that we see there. And in a way, this is very dangerous, because such conspiracy myths, and we knew before, by the way, that those who are violently against vaccination also very easily believe in anti-Semitic conspiracy. So this nexus is not new, but it becomes much more to the fore. And I think that this has shown throughout the COVID crisis. We have seen that there is a link really between the conspiracy myths that we have seen traditionally and repackaged those in the new forms. And in a way, this happened at an incredible speed. In 3 months, things have come much more to the fore. What we have done concretely now over the past 3 months with regards to these conspiracy myths has been that because the Commission has been monitoring disinformation for some time and seen its influence also state-made from third countries outside the EU, there had been already a plan to set up an EU observatory on disinformation, which is an organization that independently but funded by the EU creates platforms for fact checkers to do the fact checking on behalf either of platforms or on behalf of organizations, and then puts up walls in front of false information or conspiracy myths to say what you are about to see is false. We think that in some respect these kind of fact-checking activities can be more useful than the hate speech, and I will come to hate speech in a moment, which traditionally in Europe, according to legislation, must be taken down because we have seen that takedowns can lead to reinforcing the conspiracy myths that those producing the myths actually claim. So by taking something down, they will say, and for example, Dieudonné in France is a good example, they profit from the fact that either the state or users intervene and say, see, they have actually the power to take down my content. And besides that, they can also make quite a lot of money by being on YouTube and by getting more followers through takedowns that then reinforce their cause. The other aspect with regards to online hatred that is being spread is illegal hate speech that, according to European legislation, must be taken down. Now, we have at the moment a situation where in 2016 we created a voluntary code of conduct to take down illegal hate speech, and the platforms had to agree to that. It was their responsibility whenever things were flagged to check them against the law and, if necessary, to take things down when they're inciting to hatred and violence. This includes Holocaust distortion and denial, which is criminalized all across Europe. However, it is by far not enough enforced. So we saw a certain progress on the side of the platforms. First of all, the recognition that if they don't act and if they're not in accordance with the law, because what is illegal offline is also illegal online, that it will be to the detriment of their business model. And this, let's say, has led to some activity from their side in terms of training people and employing people who can recognize hate speech. On the other side, we see that in the end, this activity is only a fraction of the hate speech that is actually online, and it hasn't been very effective. Although we have seen progress, but still. And so the current movement that is now being made by the European Commission and was actually announced by the President of the European Commission in her inauguration speech in December is to look into the Digital Service Act, which is legislation that has been vigueur, has been in force since 2009 with regards to services provided on the net, but excluded up until now social platforms. This legislation is currently under revision and will include, once adopted, regulation for the social platforms. For example, with regards to rules on transparency, on accountability, on the responsibility to transmit data to state prosecution. So it is currently in the making, and I don't know what will be the end result, because once the Commission proposes legislation, then of course it goes to the European Parliament and the European Council, which is the representative body of the member states. But from the side of the Commission, it's very clear that for platforms who want to operate in Europe, certain rules will apply like they apply for other business models on the net, consumer-related business models, for example, or certain standard quality standards for products that need to be adhered to. This will be the next step now, and we will see. There should be a proposal by the end of the year, and then, of course, it has to follow through the legislative process. What has been important for us the last years has been to say what we need really is a structural change. I mean, there has been a lot of talk now recently about structural racism, and I believe that with regards to anti-Semitism and the Jewish community, this has been there for a long time. A high level of ignorance, some level of prejudice, and some levels of, let's say, Jew hatred. But certainly ignorance has been widespread also among state authorities. And so the idea is, if we want to have tangible change and long-term change, sustainable change, we need to change the structures from the European level, trickling through the national level, then the regional, and then also the local level. Because I believe what we have seen is that actually a lot has happened on European level, but also on national level. There are several member states who are already active in their fight against anti-Semitism, but at the moment we don't really see that there is a clear improvement for the feeling of security of the Jewish community, for them seeing their future in Europe. This is not yet happening, and we need to work towards that. The first step we made was in 2017, when the European Parliament passed a resolution which already addressed the different areas in which anti-Semitism needs to be fought. It was adopted with a 3/4 majority, and it adopted the IRA definition, which had been adopted by the IRA a year earlier. The IRA definition was key, of course, because it includes in its examples all the different forms of anti-Semitism, and including also Israel-related anti-Semitism and biases. And that is an important aspect, because we know that from our surveys among the general population on their perception of anti-Semitism, which we did in 2019, that in some countries up to 85% see the Jews in their country through the lens of the Middle East conflict. And the connection is very strong. We also have other member states in which the connection is very low, 10%, 15%. Usually these are countries of Central and Eastern Europe. But when it comes to Sweden, the Netherlands, Germany, Belgium, France, the connection is very high. And therefore the IRA definition was a key non-legislative instrument to acknowledge these forms, because of course you can't fight it if you can't define it. You are probably aware of the controversy that still goes with the IRA definition today, but I believe for the purposes of European policymaking, we have progressed in the sense that it is no longer doubted as an instrument. It is clear, it will not be legally binding, it's not made to be legally binding, but it is used as a bias indicator to know whether something is anti-Semitic or not. And according to European legislation, not everything that is anti-Semitic is necessarily illegal. So all these different nuances need to be taken into account. The IRA definition was also one of the main points when in 2018, then the Council of the European Union, so the then still 28 member states, adopted by unanimity a declaration on anti-Semitism and security for Jewish communities. And in that they adopted or recommended to those countries who have not done so yet to endorse the IRA definition. The other key aspect of this declaration was that member states signed up to passing national strategies on anti-Semitism in the context of their general strategies against racism and violent extremism. And this has really been a key moment for member states to realize it is not something that is only we only talk about in European circles, in the European council formations and the different working groups, working parties that are surrounding the European institutions, but it is something for which we have to take ownership. In order to support this process, and this was just happening when I was with you last year, we set up a working group where we bring together, and in a way it's a unique format which is not usually used in the context of European policymaking, but we bring together the representatives from the member states with the representatives from the Jewish community of that member state. We place them next to each other also in the meeting room to ensure that whatever we discuss will then be discussed in small breakup sessions among themselves, taking into account the different situation that is in each member state. That has brought some progress already, and I was myself very surprised when in June last year we held our first meeting on security of Jewish premises and Jewish communities in this format, and some Jewish representatives told me that they had had more time with their national authorities on that one day in Brussels than they ever had before in their capitals. And of course, this is not the case for the big Jewish communities that are anyway in touch with their authorities. But for smaller communities, it is still very necessary to be in touch with their authorities in a structured way, in a permanent dialogue, where then there is the recognition of the fact that it's for the states to ensure the security of its citizens, and it mustn't be for the Jewish community to either organize their security or to pay for their security. So this is a process that is now ongoing, and we see some progress there in different countries where things have been difficult. The second meeting took place in December, where we discussed the different aspects of formal and informal education. On the one side, with regards to remembrance and the Holocaust, and on the other side, also with regards to the fight against anti-Semitism, or the understanding of what anti-Semitism is. There will be different follow-ups from this that I don't need to go into now, but it is of course a very long-term project, and education, just like security, is not a responsibility of the EU stricto sensu. It's really an area where each member state has a lot of freedom, and they do what they want in terms of curricula, in terms of how they train their teachers, what they take as priorities in their teaching, and so on. So we have to take that into account when we discuss this with member states. But we see also from the side of the member states that they are very interested in getting best practices, in looking at where does it work, which trainings work, how can you better alert your teachers also as to, you know, recognizing anti-Semitic remarks in the courtyard and so on. So this is definitely in some member states a positive development. And now we just recently had our first Zoom online working group on two aspects. One was anti-Semitism and COVID, and the other one was how the IRA definition can be used for data collection and for victim support. I already mentioned briefly anti-Semitism and COVID, but with regards to using the IRA definition in the data collection and the victim support, I think it is really important for member states to understand, first of all, that recording of anti-Semitic incidents is important. We have a working party in a subgroup of a high-level group on racism and xenophobia, which focuses on the recording of hate crime very generally. We think we need to go one step further. Hate crime, first of all, it needs to be desegregated into the different groups. And secondly, in order to really know how the situation is for the Jewish community, and we know that underreporting is very high, 70 to 80%, we need to also monitor the incidents that are not necessarily criminal, but still create an atmosphere that is unpleasant and can, in a way, take away the oxygen. Yeah. So also looking at different examples like the CST in the UK, but also in Germany now, the Research and Information Office on Anti-Semitism is setting up offices where victims can report to an NGO rather than the police, and that victim support will be given also by that organization, or they will point them to professionals to support them. This is a rather new development in many countries, but we see that, and by the way, usually the figures go up. You know, so if you might have heard that, for example, in Germany, there are more than 2,000 anti-Semitic incidents recorded for 2019, which is the highest number ever. More than 5 incidents per day, very worrying. And I believe, unfortunately, underreporting is still high, but it has gone up also because the structures are being put into place where reporting can be easier, and therefore also is more likely to happen. And the other aspect then is victim support. Again, the IRA definition is crucial, so the victim doesn't go through a second victimization by having to explain why actually the incident they have encountered is anti-Semitic. And we passed recently a victims' rights directive. Well, not so recently, actually. The victims' rights directive came into force in 2018 already, but the strategy how to transpose it correctly just came out last week, which looks at group-focused support of victims. And we already have structures in place with equality bodies in each country that must be independent and so on, which, however, in the past have not really focused on anti-Semitism. So that's another structural approach we're taking now to make sure that equality bodies will be trained, also on the basis of the IRA definition, to understand anti-Semitism and how to support victims more effectively. Maybe two more aspects when it comes to, let's say, the added value of the European Union as opposed to doing things on a national level. One is a network of special envoys that is being created by member states appointing special envoys on anti-Semitism, and we have twice a year meetings where we coordinate with and exchange ideas and also best practices between the special envoys, which I think is crucial to having one entry point also for the Jewish communities. And the other aspect is that the EU as a international organization can have more weight in international bodies like the UN, like UNESCO. We had an informal General Assembly in June last year for the first time, only on anti-Semitism, which was quite impressive. We worked closely with the Special Envoy on Freedom of Religion and Belief of the UN, who brought out a very good report, as you certainly know, with good recommendations. And I think that this is also something where, as EU, we have potential to ensure that in our foreign policy, anti-Semitism and the fight against anti-Semitism is being addressed within the human rights debate and dialogues that we have with third countries. We have for years had close cooperation with Israel on this subject. In fact, this is the EU-Israel Seminar on Anti-Semitism has existed since 2005 and is a yearly gathering where we discuss different aspects where we can work together. And we have really used this tool that has been existing for a long time and in fact is independent of what else is going on between the EU and Israel. And it just, it is a tool, I believe, that has, where we have created some mutual trust in order to see also what can be done and how can we support each other, let's say, in what the aims are. To finish the introduction, I mean, that maybe beyond, let's say, the policy initiatives, there are still two instruments that are probably most effective in the long run. One is that we constantly need to speak out against anti-Semitism when we see it. Marian Turski, the Holocaust survivor who was Polish and who spoke very forcefully at the 75th commemoration of the liberation of Auschwitz in January this year. He said he learned in Auschwitz the 11th commandment, thou shalt not be indifferent. And I believe this is really something that on the one side, as an institution, we have a role to play. For example, speaking out against the Carnival of Aalst, which we did also on the record, including by the politicians, but also individually, the responsibility to address it also within the EU context, but including on social media and so on. And the second important aspect is the fostering of Jewish life. That title that was added to my original title, Coordinator on Combating Anti-Semitism, now in the new commission is And Fostering Jewish Life is added. And I believe it is very important that we proactively help to make Jewish life visible. Next year, Germany will have 1,700 years of Jewish presence in Germany. There will be street festivals and a lot of different activities throughout the year. And I believe it is this kind of activity that can really help also to show the diversity of the Jewish community and increase the acceptance also, because often given that the Jewish communities are in most countries rather small, most people actually don't know Jewish people. And so it's very important also to have that visibility. And it's of course always a challenge, because with the security aspects that unfortunately need to be there, and on the other side, open institutions and open synagogues and Jewish life accessible, we have this dichotomy that is not easy to bridge. Yes, so I think so much for an introduction from my side to update you and to give you a bit of an overview what we have been doing, and now I look forward to the debate.